Government documents show safety inspectors pushed for a recall of children's medicines months before Johnson & Johnson actually issued the largest recall ever of children's pain and cold drugs. Our Parisia Cavalance has a lot more on that and joins us now to talk about it. First of all, give us some background here on what we're talking about, because this is a pretty significant finding.
It is. Poppy, if you remember, very recently last month, there was a big recall of about 135 million bottles of very popular children's drugs such as Tylenol, Motrin, Benadryl.
Right.
Now, the company that manufactures these products is called McNeil Consumer Healthcare. They're a division of Johnson & Johnson. The factory that makes these drugs is located in Fort Washington, Pennsylvania. That factory has temporarily been shut by the company. Also last month, the FDA, which regulates the drug industry, issued a very scathing report about the conditions of this plant, citing 20 violations. It's one of the worst inspection reports that experts have ever seen on a plant. So what we did was we requested additional inspection reports of this plant going back a couple of years, and we did this by filing a FOIA. It's called the Freedom of Information Act, which is basically a law that lets any citizen get access to government records and information upon request.
So interesting, because in your reporting here, you list out this buildup of problems, but you also point out that the FDA does not have the power to force a recall unless the products pose a potential for serious injury or death. So is it fair to look at this as a case where the FDA's hands were tied and they didn't have the power to do earlier on what is clearly needed to be done?
That certainly is the case. With the FDA, Congress has not given this agency the authority, a mandatory recall authority of products. So the most that the FDA can do when it becomes aware of, problems with particular drug products or food products, they can go to the company, they can inspect their facilities, they can issue these reports, and they can lean heavily on the company to recall the products.
But they don't tell the public.
Force. Well, the FDA, my understanding is that the FDA relies on the company to do its own due diligence of its plants, of its products, and if there's a problem, they inform the FDA, and then it's the company that informs the public through a press release.
And you talk in here, one of the number of buildup of problems within McNeil at that plant was in December 2003, they listed an incorrect amount of an ingredient. So you're talking about something that could be serious.
Yes.
The FDA knew about that, which you now know from pouring through those documents.
Yes.
The public never knew about that until now.
No, not all the information is made public. And we wouldn't have known about it if, we had not requested these prior inspection reports. It's an interesting situation. My sources at the FDA say that, yes, the agency's hands are tied in this case because they don't have the authority by law to go after companies harder. But they're hoping that now what is going on with McNeil and its successive recalls over the past 8 months of millions of very popular drug products, they're hoping that lawmakers take a look at this. And we know congressional hearings are going on involving McNeil and Johnson & Johnson, and they're hoping that legislation changes and the FDA will be given the authority to, force companies to recall products.
Give us some context. What other regulatory agencies are out there that may or may not have this power?
Okay. The two other agencies, the CPSC, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, as well as NHTSA, which is the National Highway Traffic Safety Authority, which regulates the auto industry, both these agencies do have mandatory recall authority. I believe NHTSA has always had it from the beginning. And with CPSC, if you recall, 3 years ago, there were successive recalls of children's toys over lead content concern. And it was the same issue. The CPSC took a lot of hits from, lawmakers, from, consumer groups saying, listen, if you knew that the company had problems with the products, why couldn't you force them to recall it? Recall the products. CPSC said the same thing that the FDA is saying now. We didn't have the authority to do it. But then what happened with all those toy recalls, there were several hearings about this, and the law changed, and the CPSC now does have mandatory recall authority.
So, Parisia, is it fair to assume that this issue could get a lot bigger than just Tylenol and the McNeil plant?
Yes,
it could change FDA policy and regulatory power.
Exactly. Well, sources at the FDA are certainly hoping that will happen.